Tonight, unrest in Eastern Europe as the possibility of Russia invading Ukraine looms. CBN News is on the ground in Ukraine. Plus, truckers unite, the movement that started in Canada now spreading around the globe, protesting COVID-19 restrictions. And from the football field to the delivery room, the LA Rams win Super Bowl 56, and tonight a new baby for this star player. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The days are clear. War in Ukraine could break out any day. Good evening and thanks for joining us. In Washington, D.C., I'm Jenna Browder. As the U.S. evacuates its embassy in Kyiv, thousands more American troops are on their way to Eastern Europe. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan briefing House and Senate leaders all day today, while the German Chancellor is in Kyiv meeting with Ukraine's president. There are also reports that Putin may be planning an attack as early as Wednesday. CBN senior international correspondent George Thomas has more from Lviv, Ukraine, near the border with Poland.
In 2014, when Russian-backed separatists invaded eastern Ukraine, thousands of folks fled west to cities like Lviv. And today, with the threat of another Russian invasion, authorities here and across western Ukraine are bracing for 5 million refugees. We've seen the images the past few weeks. Russia adding forces and military hardware, inching ever so close to surrounding their neighbor, while Ukrainians holding almost daily drills ready to defend their country. And yet, an image you've not likely seen. Ukrainian Christians deploying their own weapon, a shield of prayer and worship.
People are worried, but we encourage them to look to Jesus with all of our might, because it's only through prayer that we can keep peace in our country.
70% of Pastor Dimitri's congregation is from eastern Ukraine, many of them escaping ongoing violence there.
My heart right now is with my relatives I left behind in Donetsk, my mom, my sister, and my grandmother. But they cannot leave this territory, and it breaks me.
With weekend talks between President Biden and Russia's President Vladimir Putin failing to calm growing tension, the White House continues to warn of major military action.
We're in the window when a Russian invasion can start at any time if President Putin so decides. That includes in the coming days.
Foreign embassies, including the United States, moving staff here to Lviv, near the Polish border. And just as that's happening, in a small upper room near Lviv's city center, Christians from across Africa praying for their host country, ready to be hands and feet of Jesus to those who may have to flee.
As Christians and as people of God, it's our job and it's our duty to pray for the whole world, because the Lord wants peace.
On the other side of town, area pastors met Sunday night for a time of planning and prayer, many telling CBN News what's at stake for their country.
This is ultimately a fight for freedom.
Valery Marchenko's brother pastors a church in an eastern area occupied by Russian separatists.
They're forbidden from having church meetings together, but they still do it secretly. And I think this is what will happen if Russia invades. But the truth is that it is impossible to stop the Church of Jesus Christ.
And it's that church here in Lviv that's continuing to preach hope and peace in the midst of uncertainty.
And George joins us now live from Lviv, Ukraine, with more. George, great reporting. We're so glad that you're there. Do people in Ukraine really believe the people in NATO and the U.S. will defend them if Russia does, in fact, invade?
Well, unfortunately not, Jenna. I mean, they just have to look back to 2014 when Russian-backed separatists invaded the eastern part of Ukraine, the regions of Luhansk and Donetsk, and the United States nor any of our NATO allies did anything. You got to remember, Jenna, that 30-some years ago, Ukraine made a pact with Russia, with the United States, with the UK, that in exchange for giving up Ukraine's nuclear weapons, remember back then, Ukraine had the third largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world. And so the deal was that they convinced the Ukrainians to give up their nuclear weapons in exchange for this guarantee that if any country invaded Ukraine, that the United States, NATO would come to its rescue. Well, 8 years ago, when the Russian-backed separatists invaded eastern Ukraine, not a finger was lifted by either the United States or our NATO allies. So they're not banking on it. But, look, the ground realities can quickly change all of that. We saw what happened in Serbia when the atrocities were being committed in that part of the world. The United States back then, under the leadership of Bill Clinton, decided to deploy a military mission to Serbia. Serbia wasn't part of NATO. So I think if the calculus changes here, the military, if an invasion does take place, and it's horrific as they are predicting, I'm sure NATO and the United States would very likely get drawn into it.
Yeah, George, if there is an invasion, horrific is what we're hearing. But do you think Ukrainians, they could respond with guerrilla warfare?
There is something about the Ukrainian spirit that is quite admirable, and I've seen it coming here for quite some time. And you saw this 8 years ago. Even though the Russians managed to get a chunk of their country, they still held the line. Like, for example, in the city of Mariupol, down in the southeastern part of the country, the Russian separatists took that city, and it suffered enormous casualties and destruction. Yet the Ukrainian soldiers fought back and retook Mariupol. And in the last 8 years, they've managed to keep the Russian separatists at bay. So they have a fighting spirit. And there is no doubt, if you look at cities, street corners like the one behind me, the Russians don't have advantage of having lived in Ukraine. Ukrainians do have that advantage. So they know every nook and cranny, every street corner. And unless Russia decides to completely carpet bomb, for example, Kyiv and some of these other cities, it's very difficult to hold major cities like Kharkiv or Kyiv. So you could potentially see street-to-street battle, but unless the Russians completely, as I said, destroy these cities, it's going to be street-to-street warfare. And that's something that the Ukrainians know the Russians really want, because it would, like I said, and as experts have said, lead to horrific consequences on both sides.
George, just a few seconds left, but I want to ask you, is there still a sense of hope, or any sense of hope, that Putin will actually back down? Who knows? Nobody knows, right, what is in the mind of Vladimir Putin. But what is clear to the Ukrainians, to the United States, to our NATO allies, is that he has amassed an enormous number of soldiers as well as military hardware, pretty much surrounding 2/3 of the country. And today, Ukraine's foreign minister is demanding to know from the Russians, tell us your intentions. Why have you deployed these troops? What is your goal? Why have you deployed them? And they've asked the Russians to respond in 48 hours. Yeah, the world is waiting and watching. We will see. George Thomas in Lviv, Ukraine. Thank you so much, George. Stay safe over there, and we'll check back in with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, to Canada, where strict new COVID restrictions are easing up some. Today, Ontario's premier announcing the province will lift proof of vaccination requirements starting March 1st. Meanwhile, police in Windsor moved against protesters blocking a major international gateway. The Ambassador Bridge connecting Ontario to Detroit shut down for days, blocking millions in commerce. As Dale Hurd reports, those goods are moving again.
After days of protests that brought this crossing between Michigan and Ontario to a standstill, police and SWAT teams moved in to put a stop to the week-long blockade.
You have a vehicle that's parked in here. We're asking you to move it.
Authorities towed cars and pickup trucks and arrested a handful of protesters. The blockade was so effective it caused disruptions at some U.S. auto plants.
It's just one more thing that is challenging auto production. I would think that plants would start up early next week.
There continue to be large protests in Europe against COVID restrictions, including in the Netherlands and France, where police used tear gas on demonstrators. One U.S. lawmaker is showing his support as there's talk of trucker protests spreading to America.
I'm all for it. Civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is a time-honored tradition in our country, from slavery to civil rights to you name it. Peaceful protest, clog things up, make people think about the mandates.
Meanwhile, another blockade is forming in Buffalo at the Peace Bridge into Canada. New York's governor says authorities will move in to deal with any blockade of the border. The Department of Homeland Security has distributed a bulletin to law enforcement agencies warning that a convoy of protesting truckers will potentially begin in California as early as mid-February and arrive in Washington, D.C. as late as mid-March. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, the cost for everyday essentials on the rise for everyone, especially one group of Americans. You're watching CBN's Faith Nation. Welcome back. Inflation on the rise and hitting low-income Americans the hardest. As the higher prices are squeezing budgets, many families are struggling to put food on the table and gas in the tank. CBN's Brody Carter is checking with analysts about how this is widening the divide between different income levels. Brody?
Jenna, wealthier Americans can often weather these storms better due to various safety nets. They can dig into savings, get a home equity loan, or even take from their 401k, but many Americans have none of those options.
It brings down the standard of living. If you get a 7% raise, but inflation's going up 9%, now we're talking on balance here, averages, your standard of living is going down. And that's why people are so upset and they're so unhappy. Who does this hurt the most? People who are making the least amount of money in our society.
Consumer prices rose 7.5% over the last year. This record inflation has overshadowed wage growth, especially in lower-income households. While paychecks may have increased, these rising prices led to an actual decrease of 1.7%. A recent poll found that Americans in the lowest 20% earnings bracket spend the majority of their money on necessities, just like food, energy, and housing, all of which have seen some of the largest cost increase in decades. As the nation waits on the Federal Reserve to intervene by raising interest rates, one economist tells me that Americans, whether rich or poor, should put together a budget with frugal spending measures.
And if I were advising anyone, low income or otherwise, I would say wait. If there's in any way at all you can wait to do something like buy a car, wait.
Wednesday, the Federal Reserve will release details from its most recent committee meeting, giving further details on the possibility of raising interest rates and by how much. Jenna, back to you.
All right, Brody Carter, thank you very much. LA Rams wide receiver Cooper Kupp named Super Bowl MVP. Up next, who he calls the greatest playmaker that's ever lived. The LA Rams are Super Bowl champions after a thrilling come-from-behind victory over the Cincinnati Bengals. Rams quarterback Matthew Stafford throwing the winning touchdown pass to wide receiver Cooper Kupp, who was named the team's MVP. After the game, Kupp said God gave him a vision after a previous Super Bowl loss.
In 2019, we walked off the field that last time after losing to the Patriots. I wasn't able to be a part of that thing. I don't know what it was. There's just this vision that God revealed to me that we were going to come back. We were going to be a part of a Super Bowl. We were going to win it. And somehow I was going to walk off the field as the MVP of the game.
Well, Kupp had the most catches, receiving yards, and touchdowns during the season, earning him the NFL's coveted Triple Crown in addition to the MVP. And that's something only 4 players have ever accomplished. CBN Sports reporter Tom Buehring sat down with Cooper long before the big game to find out what makes him a #1 player.
A game can provide a remarkable emerging journey, even at a distance. It has for Cooper Kupp. The Rams' playmaking receiver is shaped by bloodlines from Yakima, Washington's first family of football, 3 NFL generations worth, while setting multiple college career records from Eastern Washington before making an immediate NFL impact in Los Angeles.
So, Coop, your offensive awareness has almost made you a quarterback whisperer, chemistry with your quarterback. What's most important to you about earning trust?
Huge. Us to ask the quarterback to sit back there in the pocket, knowing that there's guys bearing down on him. Him just being able to trust that we're going to be at the right spot at the right time, I think is everything in terms of that relationship. And if we're not doing that, that's when things got to go off schedule. Now you're asking our quarterback to have to make a play because we're offense receivers.
Football's a game about game speed. How do you prepare yourself to what that requires?
Yeah, well, I think it's just practice. Our approach to practice, I think, is paramount. We always say that practice preparation equals game reality. Exactly what we want it to be in terms of our tempo and our focus going into that and just being able to execute. When we get to the game, we step on the field on Sunday, we've already performed this over and over again during practice. So much about football is preparation. You go out there on Sunday with a quieted mind, be able to just play the game that you've prepared all week for.
Does the tempo and rhythm of football heighten your awareness just translating into life? You're a dad now, you've got no choice probably by that, right?
It's interesting because I feel like, sometimes you come into work and you gotta be laser focused all the way through. And that in another way, it's nice to be able to go home and feel like, oh, well, I don't have to be like that right now. But yeah, we do have a 1-year-old now, so I get the 24/7 training experience.
Looking back now, storied, record-setting career at Eastern Washington, how did that prepare you for the NFL?
Going to Eastern, I had coaches that came around me that never let me become complacent with anything. Yes, this is good, but this is how you can be better. He's just calling me to something greater than I'm seeing for myself. Look at how much better you can be if you can fix these things and get in there and say, well, this was good, how can I be better?
Your family, the Kupps are now just the 5th to have 3 generations drafted in the NFL playing the game. Your dad as a former quarterback, your granddad as a former lineman. What kind of support did that give you?
Oh, I mean, it's been incredible to have such experience to lean on and just perspective. I think how much they love their family, how much they took care of things, how they treated people. I'm now being able to live out my dream, but I have such bigger things happening in my life that are beyond football. As much as I absolutely love football and know I'm going to put everything I have into it, that I've got a family at home, and my faith in Christ as well, that just is more important to make sure that's healthy. That's something that my dad and grandpa showed me.
The ACL tear. What did you learn about yourself you never would have seen by the waiting, the wondering, and the rehabbing?
That's a good question. There's a lot of lessons I think I learned through this, but I think if I pinpoint it down, it's that I can't do this by myself. The first thing that comes to mind is just the spiritual battle that goes on when something like this happens. Just reactively is why. What caused this to happen? I needed God. I needed to trust in what my faith was. Just having my wife and son to be able to push me. The teammates, the coaching staff, the training staff, strength staff. I mean, I just had a team around me that encouraged me, really showed me how important it was to have people around me that God's really placed in my life, seeing how much of a blessing that is.
Faith is a huge part of that. Our faith is that, that we're not number one. We're not the number one focus of our lives, and it's others, and it's Christ first, and then it's others, starting with the closest people to you.
I know he knows there's purpose in everything, and he'll look back and know that he's grown from it, and he's a stronger person, and hopefully he can help someone else down the road that goes through the same thing.
All right, hey, it's a great Rams win today. Great day for the Rams, great day for Coop.
You are referred to as a playmaker, altering a game, impacting a game. Off the field, you ever consider Jesus Christ being a playmaker in lives?
He might just be the greatest playmaker that's ever lived. Restoration, redemption, sacrifice.
what he laid on the line to change the world forever. You can't find a better playmaker than Jesus Christ.
Coop, who is he to you?
I don't think there's words to really, at the very basic levels of my life, as a husband, as a father, football player, knowing how much of a failure I am at these things. If it wasn't for my faith, if it wasn't for knowing that Christ has told me who I am in his eyes, and know that no matter how far short I fall on all these things, that he's bridged every gap and that he's called me to even greater things.
Still ahead, Rams wide receiver Van Jefferson won more than the Super Bowl. What happened when his wife went into labor mid-game? Finally tonight, a Super Bowl win for the books. The LA Rams celebrating their win over Cincinnati last night. But wide receiver Van Jefferson didn't get to stick around for long. Jefferson's wife, Samaria, was 40 weeks pregnant with their second child and due after Valentine's Day. But the baby came early. Samaria went into labor in the middle of the game and was taken to the hospital on a stretcher. Jefferson got the news after sealing the Rams' victory, hustling to the hospital with his father and 5-year-old daughter, Bella. Shortly after, Jefferson welcomed his son into the world. The Super Bowl champ caught 4 of 8 targets for 23 yards in the Rams' win. But perhaps his biggest catch of the night, a healthy baby boy. And that is going to do it for Faith Nation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And of course, happy Valentine's Day. Have a great evening.